Hello, my dear viewers. Today's episode will be filled with horror, tragedy, and mystery. I'll share two stories based on real events that expose the darkest sides of life. These are crimes you won't be able to forget. Let's begin. In May 2004, a disturbing message appeared on the website of a Korean church in the British town of Kingston, immediately drawing the attention of its members. "Help me find my sister." These words held an open appeal, a desperate plea for assistance from a person in need of the community's support. The author of the post, being far away in Korea, was reaching out to Koreans living in the United Kingdom, hoping for their help in finding his sister. The missing woman was also a member of this church, and her disappearance immediately sparked a broad response. As it turned out, the message was about 38-year-old Kang Tae-hee, a Korean woman who had been living in Kingston in recent years. She had long planned to return to Korea, but on the appointed day, her family could not reach her. An entire week passed, but Kang Tae-hee still did not make contact. Her family's concern grew with each passing day, and the sense that something had happened would not leave them. The situation appeared so serious that her younger sister, who was in Korea, felt the need to seek help from those who might be near Kang Tae-hee. Wasting no time, she posted her appeal on the Korean church's website, hoping that someone from the community could help find her sister. A bit about Kang Tae-hee herself. In 1997, she married an Englishman named Paul Dalton, who was 3 years younger than her. They lived in the United Kingdom, where they led, on the surface, a quiet and stable family life, raising their 6-year-old daughter. It seemed that nothing foreboded trouble. The family had appeared strong and prosperous through all the years of their life together. When Kang Tae-hee disappeared, her relatives immediately tried to contact Paul, her husband, hoping to get some answers from him that could shed light on the situation. In response to their questions, he said that they had recently had a major argument, after which Kang Tae-hee left the house and never returned, and had not contacted him since. This answer alarmed the family, but what worried them even more was Paul's tone when he shared this news. His voice showed no trace of worry or fear for his wife, as if her absence did not concern him at all. This strange calmness seemed suspicious, and it only increased the fear and mistrust with which her family took Paul's words. Not expecting anything good, Kang Tae-hee's younger sister made a firm decision to fly to England immediately to personally search for her missing sister. With each passing day, her worry grew, and the weight became unbearable. At the same time, her message was seen by the pastor of the Korean church in Kingston, who knew Kang Tae-hee personally. Alarmed by her disappearance, he tried to call her home right away, but unfortunately there was no answer. Learning that Kang and her husband managed a language school, the pastor decided to go there, hoping to find her. However, his hopes were crushed. The school was closed. Usually this place was bustling and filled with students, but now it looked abandoned, only heightening the concern. Meanwhile, as Kang Tae-hee's younger sister was on her way, her husband, Paul Dalton, began acting increasingly suspiciously. He called his parents, leaving a strange voicemail message that shook everyone who heard it. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just hit her, and it went wrong." His parents, shocked by what they had heard, immediately went to their son's home, hoping to see him and find out what had actually happened. But when they arrived, they found no one there. Mr. Dalton, uneasy and desperate to understand where his son and daughter-in-law were, began searching the house looking for any clues. Entering the kitchen, he noticed a large refrigerator that hadn't been there before. Opening it, he found several large bags. Sensing something was terribly wrong, he cautiously opened one of them, and what he saw left him horrified. Inside the bag were human body parts. Realizing the full horror of what had happened, he immediately called the police, aware that what had transpired was far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. When the police arrived at the scene, they immediately began examining and collecting all the bags they found, each of which was sent to the lab for further forensic analysis. The body of the missing woman had been divided into 9 separate bags. After a thorough examination, experts confirmed that it was indeed Kang Tae-hee, whose disappearance had haunted her family and friends for weeks. Thus, the woman everyone had been searching for was ultimately found dismembered in her own home, a place that should have been a safe haven for her. The crime scene inspection revealed even more disturbing details. There were no signs of forced entry or outside intrusion, leading investigators to suspect that the killer was likely someone close to her, someone with free access to her home. This suspicion was further confirmed by the voicemail Paul Dalton had left for his parents, in which he admitted to an accident where he didn't mean to kill anyone. These chilling words made him the primary and only suspect. Police immediately began tracking his location, but they soon discovered he had already fled the United Kingdom, escaping to Japan. British authorities were now faced with a serious challenge. They needed to quickly find a way to bring Paul Dalton back to the country so he could face justice. They began taking the necessary diplomatic and legal steps, including working closely with Japanese authorities to secure his forced return. These efforts continued for over 2 weeks after Kang Tae-hee's body was found, but they finally paid off. Dalton was compelled to return to the United Kingdom. The moment he arrived at Heathrow Airport, he was arrested, set to be held accountable for the brutal murder that had shocked not only the Korean community, but also the British public. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to his guilt, Paul Dalton adamantly denied his involvement in the murder from the very beginning. He claimed that although the body had indeed been found in his home, this did not necessarily make him the killer. Dalton insisted that someone else could have committed this gruesome crime and then left his wife's dismembered body in their house. This version of events sounded implausible, but it allowed him to prolong the investigation, which stretched on for almost an entire year. However, after a year of relentless interrogations and meticulous investigations, the police managed to secure a confession. In June 2005, Paul Dalton was formally charged with the intentional murder and dismemberment of his wife. It emerged that he had killed his wife, then dismembered her body, and believing he could evade justice, fled abroad. Even with all the evidence against him, Paul Dalton continued to categorically deny his guilt in his wife's murder, and many who followed the case expected that his brazen denials and the heinous nature of the crime would result in a life sentence. But events took an entirely unexpected turn. In July of that same year, the Central Criminal Court of London delivered its verdict. Paul Dalton was found not guilty of premeditated murder. Yes, not guilty. The court ruled that his actions constituted manslaughter rather than intentional murder. In other words, the court concluded that he had not intended to kill his wife, but had accidentally inflicted a fatal injury on her during the heat of an argument. The sentence was staggering. Dalton received only 5 years in prison, with 3 years given for concealing the body and a mere 2 years for the manslaughter itself. When this news spread, it caused shock and outrage not only among the family of the deceased Kang Tae-hee, but also throughout the entire Korean community in the United Kingdom. Many began to wonder if this was a case of racial discrimination against the victim, given that Kang Tae-hee was Korean. Was a sentence of only 5 years truly fair for such a brutal crime? The inevitable question arose: what had really happened, and why did the court reach such a lenient decision? According to Dalton's version presented in court, on that fateful day, he and his wife began arguing over issues related to running their language school together. Though the argument started over minor disagreements, it quickly escalated into a more serious conflict. Dalton claimed that in a moment of anger, Kang Tae-hee allegedly told him she had only married him to obtain a British visa. According to him, this statement struck him deeply and drove him into a rage. While he insisted he had no intention of harming her, in a fit of anger, he began to strangle his wife, then landed a single punch. By the time Paul Dalton regained his senses, his wife was already lying unconscious on the floor. This sight, he claimed, horrified him. Dalton said he froze for a moment in fear, unsure of what to do. But soon, his concern shifted to their daughter. Realizing that their 6-year-old girl was home and could have witnessed something terrible, he took her upstairs to her room. For about 10 minutes, he tried to calm the child, telling her that everything would be fine. Leaving his daughter, Dalton went back downstairs to his wife. Realizing that Kang Tae-hee was already dead, he faced a choice: call the police or attempt to cover everything up. But instead of calling emergency services and reporting what had happened, he decided to dispose of the body himself. Soon after, Dalton went to an appliance store and purchased a large refrigerator, clearly not intended for ordinary use. He then stopped by another store where he bought an electric knife. The following 2 days, he dedicated himself to dismembering his wife's body. By this time, Kang Tae-hee was supposed to have left for Korea, and her family grew concerned when she did not appear on the scheduled day. They tried to reach her, and Dalton, showing no sign of distress, confidently claimed that she had left the house and not returned. He took care to thoroughly clean up all traces that might indicate what had happened, and then fled to Japan, hoping to evade justice. However, his actions raised suspicions. Purchasing a refrigerator and a specialized knife, dismembering the body, all pointed to a cold and calculated approach. These steps made it difficult to believe his claim that his wife's death was a tragic accident during an argument. Since Kang Tae-hee was already deceased, the investigation had to rely entirely on Paul Dalton's words. All testimonies were dependent solely on his confessions and explanations of the events. It's also worth noting that Dalton was a rather large man, standing 184 centimeters tall, and thanks to regular workouts, possessing well-developed musculature. This further complicated the credibility of his claims about an accidental death. It was hard to believe that a man of his strength could accidentally kill his wife with a single punch. According to the autopsy results, the punch had struck her jaw, resulting in a severe bone fracture that caused significant blood loss. Blood that pooled in her airways led to asphyxiation, which ultimately caused Kang Tae-hee's death. The primary question facing the jury centered on Dalton's intentions. Was this punch part of a premeditated murder, or did he truly have no intention of causing fatal harm? The autopsy results could not definitively confirm that the death was intentional, which played in Dalton's favor. Since the cause of death was asphyxiation not involving a weapon, this weakened the case against him. The jury believed that if Paul Dalton had truly intended to kill his wife, he would likely have used a knife or firearm rather than relying solely on a punch. The fact that he simply left her unconscious after the blow cast doubt on his intent. At the same time, his quick decision to dismember the body and dispose of it raised suspicions. Yet, despite these lingering questions, Dalton's account was interpreted in his favor, and no convincing evidence emerged to disprove his claims of an accidental death. In court, Paul Dalton portrayed himself as a victim of years of verbal abuse from his wife. He claimed that prior to their marriage, he had a girlfriend and had no intention of marrying Kang Tae-hee. However, according to him, her intense jealousy and obsessive behavior supposedly forced him into the marriage. Dalton alleged that after their wedding, Kang Tae-hee systematically humiliated and insulted him throughout their 7 years together, while he tried to endure and forgive her actions as best as he could. Dalton's statements received extensive media coverage, sparking mixed reactions from the British public. Some saw Dalton as a man who could no longer bear his difficult family life and could no longer tolerate his cruel Korean wife, whose words and actions, he claimed, had become unbearable for him. Supporters of this view believed that the accumulated irritation and constant tension that, according to him, characterized their relationship, played a key role and possibly served as a catalyst for his tragic decision. Dalton also stated in court that Kang Tae-hee kept all the profits from their joint language school for herself, relegating him solely to the role of a teacher and manual laborer. He claimed that he felt used and undervalued. In his defense, Dalton presented this scenario as proof that his actions were the result of accumulated dissatisfaction and a long loss of control over himself. Ultimately, the court accepted this version as a mitigating factor. The jury, having examined all the presented evidence, decided that Kang Tae-hee's actions were the trigger that led to the tragedy, and this decision became the reason for a substantial reduction in the sentence. However, the question arose, was everything really as he had said? Kang Tae-hee's relatives claimed that Dalton's testimony was complete fabrication and slander. According to them, he was the one who had pursued their relationship, actively courting Kang before the wedding, persistently seeking her attention, and proposing marriage himself. After the marriage, Kang Tae-hee proved to be a hardworking, determined, and serious woman. She worked diligently, and thanks to her efforts, the family was able to purchase a home in England, a significant achievement. Kang Tae-hee's hard work and contributions allowed them to open a school that became the family's primary source of income. However, there was not a single witness in court who could represent Kang Tae-hee's perspective or defend her honor. The entire trial seemed heavily skewed in Dalton's favor. Unfortunately, her family, residing in Korea, was too far away to provide her with support or appear in court to refute his words. Something entirely unexpected happened, which altered the court's view of Kang Tae-hee. It turned out that one particular family episode worked against her. Once, during a past argument with her husband, her sister had written a letter to Dalton in an attempt to reconcile the conflict between them. In this letter, she wrote something along the lines of, "My sister may lose her temper, but she is kind and never holds grudges. I hope that you two can live peacefully and forgive her sharpness. Please understand her and forgive her. She holds no grudges, believe me." The sister clearly intended to help Kang Tae-hee mend her relationship, hoping that this letter would soften the situation. But in court, this letter was interpreted entirely differently. It became evidence that even her sister supposedly acknowledged her difficult nature and temper. Thus, the letter unexpectedly turned into proof of her instability, and allegedly became another argument in favor of the defense's version, casting Kang Tae-hee in an extremely unfavorable light. In October 2004, while the investigation was still in full swing, British police made a visit to Korea to meet with Kang Tae-hee's family. Officially, this visit was explained by good intentions, to express condolences for the tragic loss and inform the family on the progress of the investigation. However, it soon became clear that the British police representatives who attended the meeting had additional hidden motives. During a conversation with Kang Tae-hee's mother, officers posed an unexpected question that led the family to question the integrity of the police. They asked her how she would feel about Paul Dalton possibly receiving a more lenient sentence. This question, almost like a provocation, caught Kang Tae-hee's mother off guard. In confusion, she responded that her primary concern was the fate of her young granddaughter. She said it was less important to her how much time Paul would spend in prison. The main thing was that he should be released eventually and able to take care of his daughter. This response, spoken with good intentions and genuine concern for the child, was interpreted entirely differently in Britain. It was taken as a sign that the family of the late Kang Tae-hee did not demand a harsh punishment for Paul Dalton. These words became a formal reason to claim that the victim's family did not insist on a fair and strict sentence for the perpetrator, and subsequently, this statement was used as grounds for further decisions, effectively depriving her family of the chance to present additional testimony in defense of Kang Tae-hee. It turned into an extremely unfair and convoluted situation, where the mother's sincere care for her granddaughter's interests was misinterpreted to support Dalton's defense. Such a situation, of course, aroused suspicions. In some legal circles, a theory emerged that the British prosecution had never truly aimed for a guilty verdict against Paul Dalton for premeditated murder. This theory was based on the fact that only Dalton's parents and close acquaintances were called to testify. None of Kang Tae-hee's friends or relatives were brought into the case as witnesses, raising serious doubts about the objectivity of the judicial process. As a result, the trial was primarily based on the statements and versions presented by the defendant's side. Moreover, the trial concluded in just 2 weeks, which was highly unusual for a case involving such a brutal crime, which typically lasts several weeks to several months. This case ended far too quickly for such a heinous crime, and today Paul Dalton is already free, having served only 5 years in prison. Now, he lives an unremarkable life, blending in like an ordinary person, despite the fact that he once took his wife's life. The dead, as we know, cannot defend themselves or dispute the accusations against them, or the versions presented. Perhaps this is precisely why it would have been fair for the investigation and judicial process concerning Dalton to have been conducted with greater rigor, with an attention to detail and an objectivity that many felt was lacking here. Kang Tae-hee died in a distant country, surrounded by a foreign culture, without the ability to seek protection or support from anyone. Tragically, when the trial began, there was no one to stand for her, to tell her side of the story, or to refute the accusations made by her husband. Her loved ones were too far away to intervene in time and provide the support she needed. Nearly 20 years have passed since this tragedy, yet the feeling of injustice surrounding this case remains. Sadly, similar cases may happen elsewhere, where victims are deprived of a voice, and perpetrators receive minimal punishment. We can only hope that such crimes will be investigated with the due diligence and fairness they deserve, and that no more leniency will be granted to those who have taken a life. Eternal memory to Kang Tae-hee, a woman who could not find justice in a foreign land, but whose story remains with us as a reminder of the importance of the fight for truth and justice. Stay tuned. The second story is coming up, and it will make you think even more. What are your thoughts on the first story? Let me know in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your opinion. My children are in danger. I think my husband is about to harm them. On January 13th, 2015, at 9:35 in the morning, an urgent call reached the Sangnok police station in Ansan. On the other end was a woman's trembling voice. According to her, her two daughters were currently in the home of her ex-husband. For the girls, this man was their biological father, right? But then her current husband, their stepfather, had suddenly shown up at the ex-husband's home and was threatening them with a knife. At first glance, the situation was anything but simple. The moment the call came through, police dispatched officers immediately to the apartment complex in Bono district, Sangnok-gu, Ansan, where Choi's ex-husband Park lived. As they sped to the scene, officers on the line continued to gather more details, specifically how many people were inside. Choi explained that her ex-husband, Park, the children's biological father, was indeed in the home. However, he was physically disabled, moved with difficulty, and rarely left the apartment, so it was likely he was inside. She also mentioned that Park had a live-in partner. So, in the house were her ex-husband Park, his partner, and Choi's two daughters. And finally, the one making threats, Choi's current husband, 46-year-old Kim Sang-hoon. The police confirmed, so he's holding 4 people hostage? The gravity of the situation settled over them. Before attempting entry, the police secured the perimeter, and at 10:15, they made initial contact with Kim Sang-hoon. At this moment, Kim erupted in a furious shout, "How dare you call the police?" He was enraged that Choi had contacted law enforcement and escalated his aggression. He demanded that they bring Choi to him. At that point, it was still unknown whether all 4 hostages inside were alive. The police devised a plan, attempting to avoid further provoking Kim Sang-hoon. It turned out that Kim and Choi had been married, but by then, they were living separately. Kim suspected that Choi was avoiding his calls because she was cheating on him, and he suspected her lover was none other than her ex-husband, Park. This was the reason he had stormed into the house armed with a knife. Soon, Choi herself arrived at the scene. Following police instructions, she called Kim, begging him to stop and release the hostages. In response, Kim shouted, "Hey, you come inside too," demanding that she join him. But if they allowed Choi inside, there was no telling what tragedy could ensue. A negotiator was brought in, and talks with Kim dragged on for over 5 hours. The time had already passed 2 in the afternoon. Finally, the long negotiations seemed to have an effect, and Kim appeared to calm down somewhat. He expressed a willingness to surrender. He told the police, "I'll be out soon." And with a sigh of relief, they waited by the door. But 2, 3, 5 minutes passed in complete silence. Concern began to set in. The officers tried calling Kim again, but his phone was off. This was a troubling sign. At 2:25 p.m., a SWAT team arrived on the scene. They climbed to the roof, broke a window, and entered. Unfortunately, the first person they found was Park, 49, already dead in the bathroom. But the tragedy did not end there. In one of the rooms lay Choi's younger daughter, 16-year-old An, unconscious with a wound on her neck. She was rushed to the hospital, but despite the doctor's best efforts, she did not survive. Fortunately, Park's live-in partner and Choi's 17-year-old older daughter survived. However, both were so severely traumatized that they later developed serious psychological injuries. Kim Sang-hoon, the one who took hostages and murdered both the stepfather and the daughter, appeared completely unharmed. He was immediately arrested at the scene. 2 days later, on January 15th, Kim was brought to court for a hearing on his arrest. At that moment, he stood in front of the journalists' cameras. The police had decided to reveal his identity and publish his photograph, as Kim Sang-hoon's crime was so brutal that they believed his case should be a wake-up call to society. As Kim entered the courtroom, officers attempted to remove his hat to reveal his face. But Kim reacted aggressively, shouting in outrage, "What are you doing?" He resisted the police actions with anger. Before getting into the police car, he made a loud declaration in front of journalists and cameras, saying, "I'm a victim too. It's the police's fault that my younger daughter died, and it's all part of a conspiracy by her mother. Give me a chance to tell my side of the story." This brazen attitude and complete lack of remorse were nothing short of shocking. On January 19th, 6 days after the tragedy, A crime scene reenactment took place. Choi's eldest son, the brother of the murdered girls, was present. Overcome with rage and grief, he unleashed a torrent of insults at Kim. But Kim's reaction was even more shocking. With a smirk, he yelled, "Hey, bring your mother here!" Kim shouted this so loudly that his voice echoed throughout the crime scene. Later, it was revealed that Kim Sang-hoon had boasted about this incident in prison, recounting it to fellow inmates as though it were some twisted achievement. With a sneer, he told them, That boy got so mad he was foaming at the mouth. He saw me but couldn't even lift a finger to do anything. Poor thing nearly went crazy and I just laughed." But who is this Kim Sang-hoon really? Could this truly be his first crime? No, it was far from his first. Since 1999, he had committed 13 crimes, including theft, assault, bodily harm, and drunk driving. Yet his punishments had always been light, probation and fines. Now let's go back to the sequence of events. A day before the hostage-taking on January 12th around 3:30 in the afternoon, Kim Sang-hoon unexpectedly showed up at Park's house, Choi's ex-husband. At that time, only Park's partner was home. To avoid arousing suspicion, Kim lied to her, saying, "I'm a close friend of Park." She believed him, and he took advantage of the moment, entering the house. He immediately tied the woman up and locked her in a small room. Then he began waiting for the rest of the family to return. At 10 in the evening, Choi's ex-husband, Park, returned home from a nearby supermarket with groceries. The moment he entered, he was confronted by Kim Sang-hoon, armed with a knife. A struggle broke out between them. Kim lunged at Park with the intent to kill, while Park tried desperately to defend himself. However, due to his physical condition, Park was unable to fend off the attack. Kim struck him with the knife at least 10 times in the face and neck before dragging him into the bathroom, leaving him there to die. The cause of Park's death was massive blood loss from multiple stab wounds. An hour later, at 11 p.m., Choi's 2 daughters returned home. Originally, the girls had been living with their mother because their stepfather, Kim Sang-hoon, had repeatedly beaten and terrorized them. Choi and her daughters had been forced to hide in a motel. However, Choi ultimately believed the girls would be safer with their biological father, and she sent them to Park's home. No one anticipated that Kim would track them down there. When 16-year-old An, the younger daughter, entered the house, Kim immediately grabbed her and locked her up. Soon after, the 17-year-old older daughter arrived, and he confined her in a small room as well. The night passed with them held captive. In the morning, on January 13th at 9:17, Kim Sang-hoon used the older daughter's phone to call Choi. "I have your family. I'm holding your 2 daughters and your ex-husband hostage," he told her. The older daughter managed to tell her mother that Kim was holding a knife to her throat. Kim threatened to kill them all if Choi contacted the police, strictly forbidding her from reaching out to the authorities. It's hard to imagine any mother remaining calm in such a situation. Choi condemned him over the phone. "Why do you live this way?" she asked with fury and outrage. Her words infuriated Kim. He turned to the terrified girls and asked, "Which one of you will die first?" A few minutes later, at 9:35 in the morning, Choi called the police and reported what was happening. When Kim realized she had dared to defy his order and summon the police, he was overcome with rage. Driven by a thirst for revenge, he set upon the younger daughter An in a brutal attack. He not only stabbed her multiple times but also strangled her. An even more horrifying fact was that the older daughter was forced to watch her sister's suffering from beginning to end, powerless to help. Later, after the older daughter was rescued, she revealed an even more terrifying truth. Kim Sang-hoon had raped her younger sister An while holding them both hostage. During the assault, he said something utterly incomprehensible. "I love you! You are my woman!" This shocking confession left everyone speechless. The sexual assault was confirmed through forensic examination. It turned out that this was not simply an expression of Kim's anger towards Choi. His actions were practically impossible to explain. But this was not Kim's first crime against An. In May 2012, he had already attempted to rape her, though it had not been completed at that time. On his phone, they found photographs of An's intimate body parts, which made his crime all the more monstrous. It is said that Kim Sang-hoon and Park, Choi's ex-husband, were once so close that they called each other brothers. They were genuinely friends. However, after Park's divorce, Kim won over Park's ex-wife. In 2007, he married Choi. Initially, Kim did everything to earn her love, but after the marriage, his behavior changed drastically. He began showing his cruelty and obsession. This man had no stable job, and the money that Choi earned he squandered on gambling. On top of that, his pathological jealousy toward his wife reached terrifying levels. He was constantly suspicious, asking, "Were you seeing another man?" And at the slightest hint of suspicion, he would raise his hand against her. Like many domestic abusers, after fits of rage, Kim Sang-hoon would change his behavior, trying to justify himself. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I did it because I love you so much." He kept repeating these words over and over, each time apologizing, only to return to violence. Finally, Choi could not endure anymore and decided to flee with her daughters, choosing to live apart from Kim. However, it's important to note one crucial detail. Just a few days before the tragedy on January 7th, Choi went to the police to report Kim's violence and seek help. Choi had been locked in her home, and Kim Sang-hoon inflicted a knife wound approximately 3 centimeters long on her thigh. It was a horrific attack. The next day, Choi personally went to the Ansan police station to discuss the possibility of Kim's immediate arrest and to request a restraining order. However, the officer she spoke with said, "Oh, you need to file a formal complaint," which came off as a rather indifferent response. No urgent measures or alternative solutions were offered. The only thing Choi could do in this situation was to file for divorce and avoid any contact with Kim. She hid with her children, but a few days later, tragedy struck. In court, Kim Sang-hoon faced charges of murdering Park and the younger daughter An, as well as holding hostages and making threats. The crime was particularly heinous. In the first hearing, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment, but the prosecution deemed the punishment too lenient and filed an appeal. Kim also filed an appeal, claiming that his sentence was excessively harsh. His defense was based on acknowledging his cruelty towards Choi, but he explained it as a mistake. Even in regard to the charge of raping his stepdaughter An, Kim Sang-hoon claimed that it was a mutual relationship, which was a revolting assertion. During the second trial in January 2016, the original sentence, life imprisonment, was confirmed. In this way, Kim avoided the death penalty. The court took into consideration that Kim had grown up in an unfavorable environment and acknowledged that he was enraged by Choi's unilateral decision to divorce him, which led to the commission of the crime. However, despite these mitigating circumstances, Kim could not escape the highest measure of punishment possible in South Korea, life imprisonment. The sentence was ultimately upheld, and Kim Sang-hoon is now serving life imprisonment. This case is particularly tragic because its roots lie in chronic domestic violence. For an extended period, Choi endured severe beatings. She was stabbed, had her ribs broken, and lived constantly under threats to her life. That is why, when Choi first approached the police, the response from law enforcement was unsatisfactory. In reality, the officer with whom Choi had spoken at that time was not an active-duty policeman, but a civilian consultant. Since Choi did not file an official complaint, the consultant was limited in the actions that could be taken. However, being an ordinary citizen facing a serious threat, Choi could not know who was a consultant and who was a police officer. She was left with a sense of helplessness and deep disappointment in society. Following this incident, the police announced that they would change the system of counseling and support for victims of violence. 8 years after the tragedy, in October 2023, the government announced plans to improve protection for victims of 5 types of violence: stalking, digital sexual crimes, crimes involving abuse of power, domestic violence, and dating violence. These are the 5 types of violence we hear about more and more often in the news. Measures to protect victims of domestic violence are particularly crucial. The government plans to introduce a bill that would allow victims to change their social security numbers to protect their personal information. If the law is not misused, it could provide significant support for victims. Of course, violence is not limited only to women, but it is important that our society begins to recognize the seriousness of domestic violence with greater sensitivity. Effective measures and strict punishments are needed to ensure that cases like Kim Sang-hoon's do not happen again.